3 Roman legions marched into a forest. 20,000 soldiers, fully armed, battle-hardened, the finest fighting force the ancient world had ever produced. None of them came back. Not one. And the man who destroyed them wasn't a barbarian king with a massive army. He wasn't a military genius with superior weapons. He wasn't even an enemy. He was a Roman officer, trained by Rome, educated in Rome, trusted completely by the general he was about to destroy. His name was Arminius. And what he pulled off in 3 days in a German forest in 9 AD is still studied in military academies today as one of the most perfectly executed ambushes in the history of human warfare. How does a man Rome trained use everything Rome taught him to annihilate Rome's own army? That is the question. And the answer will change how you think about trust, intelligence, and the one thing no military system can ever fully protect against. To understand what happened in the Teutoburg forest, you need to understand what Rome thought it was doing in Germania. By 9 AD, Rome had been pushing east of the Rhine River for almost 20 years. The Rhine was the natural boundary of Roman territory in northern Europe. Everything west of it, Gaul, now France, was Roman. Pacified, taxed, administered, road networked, bath-housed. Everything east of it was Germania. Dark forests, tribal territories, people Rome considered barbarians. Not in the pejorative sense necessarily, but in the precise Roman sense of people who did not live in cities, did not organize under Roman law, did not participate in the Roman commercial and administrative system. Rome looked at Germania and saw the next province, the next tax base, the next addition to the empire. It had done this before, with Gaul, with Britain, with Spain, with North Africa. The pattern was established. Send legions, defeat resistance, build roads, install governors, collect taxes, repeat. The general sent to complete the pacification of Germania was Publius Quinctilius Varus. He was experienced, politically connected. He had previously governed Syria successfully and completely, catastrophically misreading the situation he was walking into. Varus believed Germania was already pacified. He was governing it as a province, not commanding it as a war zone. He was collecting taxes, holding courts, administering Roman law. He thought the hard work was done. He was wrong, and one man had spent years carefully, patiently making sure he stayed wrong. Arminius was approximately 25 years old in 9 AD. He was the son of a Germanic chieftain of the Cherusci tribe. As a young man, probably around the age of 10 or 12, he had been taken to Rome as a hostage, not as a prisoner in any punitive sense, as a diplomatic guarantee of his father's cooperation with Rome. This was standard Roman practice. Take the sons of allied or subject chieftains, bring them to Rome, educate them, train them in Roman military methods, give them Roman citizenship, commission them as officers in the Roman auxiliary forces. The theory was elegant. You create a class of native leaders who are culturally Roman, personally loyal to Roman institutions, militarily trained in Roman methods, and politically positioned to manage their home. Territory en Romes Buave. It worked extraordinarily well across the empire. Dozens of provincial elites had been processed through this system and returned to their homelands as effective Roman administrators and military commanders. Arminius went through the system. He learned Latin. He studied Roman military tactics. He served as an auxiliary commander. He rose to the equestrian rank, Roman knighthood. He was trusted, respected, considered a model of successful Roman cultural integration. And somewhere in those years, nobody knows exactly when, nobody knows exactly why, he made a decision. He was going to use everything Rome had taught him to destroy Rome's army in Germania. The planning was meticulous, patient, conducted entirely in secret over what historians believe was at least a year, possibly 2. Arminius needed 3 things. A coalition of Germanic tribes willing to fight together. Historically almost impossible to achieve among people defined by intertribal rivalry. A location that would neutralize Rome's tactical advantages. And complete operational security. Not a single detail of the plan could reach Varus before the moment of attack. He worked on all 3 simultaneously. The tribal coalition he built through a combination of personal relationships, political negotiation, and a shared grievance that cut across tribal differences: Roman taxation. The Germanic tribes east of the Rhine had been watching Rome's administrative machinery arrive in their territory with a combination of fascination and fury. The road building, the census taking, the tax collection, these were not abstract impositions. They were experienced daily as the intrusion of a foreign system into the fabric of their lives. Arminius weaponized their resentment with the precision of a man who had seen Rome's administrative methods from the inside and understood exactly what made them threatening. The location took longer. He needed terrain that would make Roman military formation fighting impossible. The Roman legion's devastating effectiveness depended on the ability to form and maneuver in organized units. The testudo formation, the coordinated advance, the disciplined use of javelin and sword in sequence. All of this required open ground or at least manageable terrain. The Teutoburg forest, the Teutoburger Wald, in what is now Lower Saxony in northern Germany, provided the opposite of manageable terrain. Dense forest, narrow tracks, ground that had been softened by recent heavy rain into mud that would bog down the Roman columns' wagons and artillery. Hills on one side, dropping to a swamp on the other, creating a natural corridor no wider than the column itself in the most critical sections. Arminius had grown up in this territory. He knew every feature of it. He designed his ambush around its specific geography with the precision of a military engineer, which, thanks to Rome, he was. The operational security was perhaps his most remarkable achievement. He maintained his position as a trusted officer in Varus's inner circle throughout the planning period. He attended Roman military councils. He received intelligence about Roman troop movements and dispositions. He used all of it, and he kept his conspiracy secret from everyone except those who absolutely needed to know. There was one warning. A Cheruscan nobleman named Segestes, Arminius's own father-in-law, whose daughter Arminius had abducted to marry against her family's wishes, went to Varus and told him Arminius was planning a revolt. He urged Varus to arrest Arminius immediately. Varus dismissed the warning. He attributed it to personal animosity between Segestes and Arminius over the marriage dispute. He continued to trust Arminius completely. This was the decision that killed 20,000 people. In late September of 9 AD, the Roman army, 3 full legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, plus 6 cohorts of auxiliary infantry, 3 squadrons of cavalry, and the enormous logistical tail of a Roman army on the march, began moving through the Teutoburg forest toward winter quarters. The column was enormous. Estimates suggest it stretched for perhaps 15 miles from front to rear when fully extended on the march. Soldiers, officers, engineers, support staff, camp followers, slaves, wagons carrying supplies and equipment, artillery pieces being hauled by oxen. The full machinery of a Roman army in movement. Arminius rode with the column. In his position as auxiliary commander, this was entirely normal. He stayed long enough to confirm the column's position and formation. Then, citing a need to rally allied Germanic cavalry, he rode away. He rode to his army. The Germanic forces, estimated at somewhere between 15,000 and 30,000 warriors, the precise number is unknown, were already in position, concealed in the forest on both sides of the track, waiting. Many of them had been waiting for hours, possibly since before dawn. The signal was given. The first attack hit the rear of the column. Germanic warriors emerging from the tree line with spears and swords, screaming, moving fast through terrain they knew and the Romans didn't. The column tried to respond. Roman soldiers were trained for exactly this kind of emergency. But the training assumed a formation that could be formed. In a narrow forest track, with 15 miles of columns stretched behind you and trees 10 feet from both sides, the formation that makes Roman soldiers lethal cannot be built. They were being killed in a line, not a formation. Individual soldiers fighting individual enemies in dense forest, where Roman discipline and Roman tactics had no room to operate. Where the javelin throw that opened every Roman engagement was impossible because the tree canopy was too low. where the coordinated shield wall that protected Roman infantry from missile fire couldn't be built because the column was 2 men wide in the narrowest sections. The first day was chaotic and bloody. The Romans did not collapse. They fought. They took casualties, gave casualties, kept moving, tried to maintain cohesion. Varus attempted to organize, to find open ground, to create the conditions his army needed to fight properly. He couldn't. Every direction he moved was more forest, more ambush, more Germanic warriors appearing from the trees, striking, melting back into the forest before Roman counterattacks could organize. That night, the Romans built a camp. Even in catastrophe, Roman discipline held. They dug the ditches, built the rampart, erected the perimeter. They tended their wounded. They counted their dead. The numbers were already devastating. Varus held a council. The options were terrible. Push forward. More forest, more ambush. Turn back. Germanic forces behind the column as well. Stay where they were. No water, no food, no option. They decided to push forward, to try to reach open ground where Roman tactical superiority could reassert itself. Day 2 was worse. The rain that had been threatening since the column entered the forest came down hard. The track became mud. Wagons became immovable. Horses struggled. The Roman soldiers, in their larica segmentata armor, their leather sandals, their wool tunics now soaked through, were cold, exhausted, hungry, and fighting for their lives in terrain that had been designed to kill them. The Germanic attacks intensified, not reckless charges. Arminius was too well-trained for that. Coordinated strikes on specific sections of the column. Hit and withdraw. Hit and withdraw. Preventing the Romans from ever establishing the stable front line that Roman tactical doctrine required. Preventing rest. Preventing resupply. Preventing the psychological reset that comes from a moment of safety. The Romans abandoned their wagons, then their artillery, then their heavier equipment. Anything that slowed movement was left in the mud. The column became lighter and more desperate with every hour. By the end of day 2, the column had been broken into sections. Units were separated from their command structure. Officers were dead or cut off. The precise, interlocking command hierarchy that made Roman armies function as a single organism was fragmenting under the continuous pressure of attack, casualties, exhaustion, and the psychological terror of fighting in near darkness under tree canopy against an enemy that appeared and disappeared at will. Day 3 brought the killing ground. Arminius had planned for this. He had positioned the largest concentration of his forces at a specific choke point, a place where the track narrowed between a steep hill and a marsh, where the Roman column would be compressed into its tightest formation, where escape was impossible in any direction. The surviving Romans, exhausted, depleted, many of them wounded, their command structure broken, their morale shattered, walked into it. What followed was not a battle in any tactical sense. It was a massacre. Germanic warriors on the high ground above the track. Warriors in the forest on both sides. Warriors blocking the path ahead. The Roman soldiers who had maintained their discipline through 2 days of hell broke at last. Some fought. Some ran into the forest and were hunted down individually. Some surrendered. Varus, wounded, facing the final destruction of everything he had been responsible for, fell on his own sword. The Roman general's traditional death. The way Romans ended things when there was nothing else to be done. His officers did the same. One by one, the eagles, the golden eagle standards of the 3 legions, the most sacred objects in Roman military culture, the physical embodiment of the legion's identity and honor, were captured. All 3 of them, taken by Germanic warriors who had learned from Arminius exactly what they meant and exactly what their capture would mean to Rome. By nightfall on the 3rd day, the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions had ceased to exist. Think about what those 3 days felt like from inside the column. You are a Roman legionary. You have trained for years. You are physically tough, tactically disciplined, psychologically conditioned by the most demanding military training system the ancient world has produced. You have probably fought before. You know what battle feels like, but you have never experienced anything like this. The sounds of the forest at night when you know something is in it. The specific terror of hearing men dying behind you and not being able to turn around because the column has to keep moving. The cold that has been with you since the rain started. Not the cold of discomfort, but the cold of a body that has stopped drying out, that is wet to the skin, that has been wet for hours and will be wet for hours more. The hunger. Roman soldiers on campaign carried 3 days of rations. By day 2, those rations were gone. By day 3, you are fighting on an empty stomach, in wet armor, on no sleep, with wounds that haven't been properly dressed, against an enemy you cannot see clearly enough to fight properly. The specific psychological horror of forest combat. The way the trees cut your field of vision to a few meters in every direction. The way sounds are distorted and multiplied. The way you cannot tell how many enemies there are or where the next attack will come from. The way the training that should be saving you keeps failing to apply because nothing about this environment matches the conditions your training was designed for. And underneath all of it, the growing realization that this is not going to stop, that there is no open ground coming, that the general does not have a plan that will work, that the system you trusted with your life has failed you at the most fundamental level. That realization, not the weapons, not the terrain, not the numbers, that is what broke the Roman army in the Teutoburg forest. The moment when disciplined soldiers understood that the framework that made them powerful had been turned against them by someone who understood it better than they did. The consequences were immediate and lasting. When the news reached Rome, Augustus Caesar, the first emperor, the man who had brought the Roman world to its most stable and prosperous point, reportedly wandered the halls of his palace for weeks, beating his head against the walls, refusing to cut his hair or shave, crying out repeatedly, "Varus, give me back my legions." He never recovered from it psychologically, and Rome never recovered from it strategically. The 17th, 18th, and 19th legions were never reformed. Their numbers were never reused. In a military tradition where legion numbers were routinely reused after units were disbanded or destroyed, the deliberate retirement of these 3 numbers was an act of institutional mourning. Appel Manon Romandi. Rome did not forget. The Rhine became the permanent eastern boundary of the empire. The ambition to pacify and provincialize Germania was quietly abandoned. Not officially, not in a formal policy statement, but in the practical reality of where Roman military investment went after 9 AD. It went to consolidating what Rome already had, not expanding further into German forests. The empire that had seemed destined to keep growing until it reached the edge of the known world stopped. Here, in a forest in northern Germany, because of one man with a plan and a grudge and a complete understanding of the system he was destroying. Compare Teutoburg to other famous Roman defeats. At Cannae in 216 BC, Hannibal had destroyed a Roman army, perhaps 50,000 dead in a single day, in the greatest tactical encirclement in ancient military history. Rome had recovered. It had reformed its armies, adapted its tactics, continued the war, and eventually won. At Carrhae in 53 BC, the Parthians had destroyed Crassus and his legions in the Syrian desert using horse archers. Rome had absorbed the loss, adjusted, continued. What made Teutoburg different was not the scale of the defeat. It was what the defeat demonstrated. That Rome's greatest strategic vulnerability was not military. It was intelligence. Trust. The gap between what Rome thought it knew about a situation and what was actually true. Hannibal had been a known enemy. The Parthians had been a known enemy. Arminius had been a trusted ally. A Roman-trained, Roman-commissioned, Roman-trusted officer. The intelligence failure at Teutoburg was not a failure to gather information. It was a failure of the most fundamental kind, the failure to correctly identify who was actually on your side. And that failure cannot be fixed by better roads or better logistics or better tactical training. It can only be fixed by better judgment about people. And better judgment about people is the one thing that no system, however sophisticated, can fully automate. So here is what Teutoburg Forest actually was. Not a story about Germanic barbarians defeating Roman civilization. Not a story about the limits of military power. Not even primarily a story about tactics or terrain or weather. It is a story about a system so confident in its own effectiveness that it stopped questioning its assumptions. A system that had processed hundreds of foreign hostages and produced loyal Roman officers and concluded, reasonably, based on all available evidence, that the process worked. That the man it had trained and trusted and promoted was what he appeared to be. The system was not wrong about most of the people it processed. It was wrong about one, and that one was enough. Arminius did not defeat Rome with superior weapons or numbers or courage. He defeated Rome with Rome's own information, Rome's own tactics, Rome's own understanding of how Roman armies moved and how Roman generals thought, and what Roman commanders would do when they received a trusted officer's reassurance that everything was fine. He defeated Rome with Rome, and that is why his name, largely forgotten in the popular history of most countries outside Germany, where he is remembered as Hermann the Cheruscan, a national hero, deserves to be remembered. Not because he was a barbarian who got lucky, but because he was a strategist of extraordinary sophistication who understood that the most powerful weapon against any system is a deep knowledge of how that system actually works. He had that knowledge. Rome gave it to him, and Rome paid for it in full. Here is the question that Teutoburg Forest leaves you with. And it is not a question about ancient Rome. Think about the systems you trust, the institutions, the organizations, the frameworks that you depend on to function correctly and in your interest. The ones that feel stable and tested and reliable because they have been stable and tested and reliable for a long time. Now, think about who those systems have trained and trusted and promoted, who has been given a deep inside knowledge of how they actually work, who has been positioned by the system itself to understand exactly where its vulnerabilities are. The Teutoburg Forest happened because Rome gave one man everything he needed to destroy it, and then trusted him completely. Every system does this, because systems require people to operate them, and people are the one variable no system can fully control. The question is not whether there is an Arminius inside the systems you depend on. The question is whether the people running those systems are listening to the sagesse who is trying to warn them. Varus wasn't.